In a remote town in America, where time seemed to stand still, stood a small community hospital. It had served the local population for several decades, but new technologies had replaced the old buildings, and now the hospital needed a major renovation. In the summer of 2023, the hospital management finally allocated funds for reconstruction. The staff was pleased that the building would be rid of its old problems, and during the work, their attention was drawn to one forgotten detail: a basement with a boarded-up door, labeled Floor B2. This door had long become an object of local gossip, but no one dared to open it. Some said it held archives, while others whispered about strange events that had occurred many years ago. While working on a new ventilation system, one of the workers, Matt, decided to seize the opportunity to find out what was hidden behind the door. With a few tools, he broke the lock and opened the door, revealing a dusty corridor that stretched into darkness. Silence filled the space as he stepped inside. For a long time, no human foot had tread here. Around the first bend in the corridor, he saw old doors, boarded-up windows, and cabinets filled with dusty medical supplies. Excited, Matt called for his colleagues, but then hesitated. It was as if this floor warned him there was no place for the curious here. The next day, Laura, the head nurse of the hospital, learned about this. She had worked there for nearly 20 years. Over her career, she had heard numerous stories about strange occurrences on this floor. In the 1990s, a department had been closed here, but the reasons for it remained unclear. Rumors that the floor was cursed and that it treated infectious patients lingered in the hospital. Determined to uncover the truth, Laura decided to check what the forgotten floor hid. She reached out to her friend and orderly Jack to accompany her. Jack was young and a bit apprehensive, but he agreed. Together, they descended into the basement and opened the locked door. The first thing they saw was a long corridor filled with dust and shadows. Faded signs indicating various departments hung on the walls. Laura felt her heart race. She remembered having worked here once but had never entered this floor. She took a flashlight and pointed the beam at the first door. It led to a radiology room. Inside were old machines and X-ray films covered in dust. Laura paused for a moment, recalling how she had trained here. Time seemed to freeze, and she felt memories of her work wash over her. Meanwhile, Jack opened a cabinet and discovered a stack of medical records. Surprise crept into his voice. "Laura, look at this," he exclaimed, flipping through the folders. Laura approached and read several names. One of them seemed familiar: Mary Lee, a patient who had long been treated at this hospital. She couldn't believe that her records were still here in the forgotten department. "Why haven't these records been destroyed?" she asked, puzzled. "Maybe they once treated serious patients here, and they didn't want to take any risks," Jack suggested, continuing to examine the contents. They moved to the next room, which was an old ward. Worn sheets lay on the beds, and Laura noticed that one of the beds was made up as if someone had just left it. This created a strange feeling that the place still lived its life despite years of neglect. "This is odd," Jack said, feeling a chill down his spine, as if someone could still return. Laura nodded, recalling how Mary had shared her fears and nightmares. Now this room reminded her of how crucial staff support was for patients. She realized that this place was not just abandoned but filled with life stories and memories. Soon they reached the archive room, where old folders lined the shelves. Knowing she might find something important, Laura began checking the documents. One of the first folders contained records of unusual incidents on this floor, mentioning strange sounds and phenomena observed by patients and nurses. "This looks like a fabrication," Jack said, frowning. "Maybe we should head back?" "No, wait," Laura replied, continuing her search. "I need to know the truth about what happened here." Finally, she stumbled upon notes regarding the closure of the floor. The records indicated that the department was closed after an incident involving a patient who attempted to escape and ended up getting hurt. This led to the decision to permanently close this wing of the hospital. Laura felt a sense of guilt arise within her for the story of this place remaining unnoticed. Realizing it was time to leave, Laura and Jack decided to exit the floor. On their way back, they noticed that the corridors began to appear less intimidating, and each step reminded them of the importance of caring for patients and that every person had the right to their story. I've lived my whole life in a small town lost among the mountains and forests, where time flows slowly, and the news rarely travels beyond the local radio station. People here are used to living quietly, without too much talk. 5 years ago, a new doctor came to our hospital. He had moved from a big city, looking for peace, but found something very different. The doctor, as I later found out, had been in a car accident on a rural highway. Local farmers found him in an overturned car, lying in a pool of his own blood. When they brought him to the hospital, he was in a coma. We all thought he wouldn't make it, but after 2 months, he suddenly opened his eyes. They brought him back to life, but along with him, a strange tension seemed to settle in the room, as if something inside him had broken. I've worked at the hospital for over 10 years and I've seen a lot, but this case was different. His recovery was slow. He had to learn to walk, talk, and use his hands all over again. But there was something else in his eyes, something that made me uneasy. He often sat by the window, staring at the empty parking lot, as if waiting for someone to appear. At the same time, there were 3 other patients in our ward, each with their own story. The first, Matthew, was an elderly man found near the house where his late wife had passed away. He never recovered from her death and stopped taking care of himself. Over time, he began to have bouts of aggression, and he was sent to us. He didn't talk, but sometimes at night I could hear him whispering something toward the door, like he was talking to someone invisible. The doctors thought it was just dementia, but the quiet words gave me the chills. The second patient was a young guy named Trevor. He was only 22, but there was more fear in his eyes than I'd seen in anyone's. They found him in the woods outside town, barefoot and half-dressed. He couldn't remember how he got there or why. Trevor avoided everything and everyone, even his own reflection in the mirror. He spoke about a feeling someone was watching him, and even simple conversations with him always turned into stories about the fears that followed him. The third patient, Sarah, had moved to our town a couple of years ago. She used to be a teacher at the local school, but something went wrong. One day, she lost her voice right in the middle of a lesson, and since then, she'd been plagued by panic attacks. She couldn't stand being alone in her room, and she'd freak out if the lights went out. Even the sound of footsteps in the corridor made her panic. The doctors suspected a nervous breakdown, but I could see how every time she looked at the ceiling, her eyes would widen, like she was seeing something no one else could. The doctor, who had been in the coma, slowly recovered, and one day I noticed him talking to Trevor. For the first time, Trevor spoke to someone without trembling. It was strange. He and the doctor would sit together in the room for hours, barely saying a word, but both seemed calmer than before. Matthew, on the other hand, became more aggressive, and Sarah withdrew even further, like something in the air had changed. The doctor returned to work after a few months, but he was not the same person he had been. He started avoiding night shifts, staying away from windows, and when he saw Matthew, he seemed to feel some hidden fear. His presence either brought strange relief to the other patients or heightened their anxiety. One night, I heard Trevor say to the doctor, "I know what they see." I didn't understand what he meant, but the doctor froze and abruptly cut off the conversation. After that, Trevor shut down, refused to eat, and soon was transferred to another facility. Matthew died a few weeks later, as if all his strength had drained away, and he just gave up. They found him curled up on the floor of his room, like he was trying to hide from something he had seen. Sarah seemed to recover a bit after Trevor left and Matthew passed away. But one day I noticed that she too was looking out the window more often, the same window the doctor would stare through. One day I tried asking her what she saw, but she just shook her head silently and turned away. The doctor continued his work, but every time I see him on shift, I feel like he's trying to forget something. It's as if that accident left not just physical scars, but something more. He avoids talking about the time when he was in the coma, and he steers clear of conversations about the patients. But one evening, during a late-night round, he suddenly said quietly, "Sometimes I think it would have been better if I never woke up." I'm still living in this town, still working at that same hospital. Sometimes at night, I see the doctor standing by the window of his office, looking out at the parking lot toward that same road where he had his accident. And every time I'm left with the same question: what did he see on that highway that made him afraid of even his own reflection? Now, as I write this, the cold autumn wind is blowing outside, and the hospital seems quieter than usual. But I know one thing. Something changed in this place since he came back. And maybe, just maybe, it would have been Better if none of us ever knew what that was.